The air in the secure viewing bunker tasted of ozone and institutional dread. April Woods, operating under a 7-layer non-disclosure agreement that promised legal annihilation if she blinked wrong, adjusted the gain on the monitor displaying the most sensitive military science document package she had ever accessed. The Vapor Trails file concerning the Null Zone incident. 14 elite researchers, the best minds across fields ranging from quantum mechanics to deep-sea hydrodynamics, had vanished 3 years prior, leaving behind only 48 hours of encrypted submersible footage and a set of spatial coordinates that defied known physics. April was not just reviewing a tragedy, she was attempting to reverse engineer a disappearance. The screen flared to life, displaying a cascade of highly redacted telemetry data. The official narrative, propagated through carefully vetted leaks and government spokespersons, claimed catastrophic hull failure due to unprecedented water pressure near the Challenger Deep periphery. April knew better. Catastrophic hull failure leaves debris, oil slicks, and sonic signatures. The Null Zone incident left a profound, clinical silence, as if that section of the ocean had simply been digitally excised. Her contact, a former NSA cryptographer now living under assumed identity in rural Iceland, had risked everything to provide the decryption key, emailing it with a single, terrified addendum. They didn't break the ship. They broke the location. April leaned closer, the harsh light reflecting in her tense eyes. The initial footage was deceptively mundane. The interior of the Acheron Dash, a state-of-the-art titanium alloy submersible designed to withstand 8 times the pressure of the ocean floor. The researchers, Dr. Kalin, the chief physicist, Captain Rorik, the deep-sea veteran, and 12 others, were engaged in standard pre-dive checks, their voices calm, laced with the anticipation of groundbreaking discovery. They were supposedly mapping a newly discovered geothermal vent field. But April's classified overlay, provided by her Icelandic ghost, displayed the actual mission parameters. Project CHRONOS, designated study of localized spatial temporal erasure fields, LTEFs. The coordinates they were heading toward were not a geological feature. They were a repeating anomaly, flashing red in the archived data log. A point in space that seemed to actively reject stable existence. The first hour of footage was a masterclass in controlled paranoia, every voice inflection and systems check magnified by April's knowledge of the grim outcome. She noted the subtle tremor in Dr. Kalin's left hand as he input the final, fatal navigation vectors. This wasn't excitement. It was fear, suppressed by professional rigidity. April paused the image momentarily, studying the researcher's face, seeking the exact moment the intellectual pursuit crossed the boundary into sheer, existential terror. The counter on the bottom of the screen read 47 hours, 58 minutes, and 34 seconds. The vanishing was scheduled for precisely midnight. April had 48 hours of recorded dread to watch. Part 2. Project Kronos and the Impeccable Lie. The first 4 hours of the Acheron's descent were dominated by the procedural chatter that masks profound risk. April Woods, meticulously cross-referencing the video feed with the newly decrypted text logs, felt a growing sense of journalistic revulsion at the layers of deceit involved. The official project name, Deep Sea Biosurvey 17, was printed on the researchers' uniforms, a meaningless cipher over their real work. Project Kronos was the brainchild of a deeply buried division within the Department of Advanced Theoretical Warfare, DATW, aimed at weaponizing or failing that, neutralizing localized reality distortion. The 14 missing individuals were not merely geologists. They were specialists in applied metrology and exotic matter physics. The sheer talent density aboard the Acheron spoke volumes about the perceived threat, or opportunity, of the Null Zone. April watched as Dr. Kalin addressed the team, his briefing framed in the language of geothermal anomalies, while the overlaid metadata showed his instruments were tuned to detect gravitational wave inconsistencies and high-frequency temporal decay signatures. The Acheron descended through the mesopelagic zone, the ambient light fading rapidly. At 1,500 meters, the first genuine anomaly registered, visible only in the external camera's infrared spectrum. The water, usually dense and refracting light predictably, began to shimmer, not from heat, but from a subtle spatial displacement, like watching an image through slightly warped glass. April noted the immediate, suppressed excitement among the crew. Captain Rorik, typically stoic, cracked his knuckles repeatedly, his eyes locked on the navigation board. The actual coordinates they were targeting, N11.2345, E144.5678, with a depth modifier that changed dynamically, were, according to the DATW internal memoranda April had secured, the site of a confirmed, persistent violation of the holographic principle. Essentially, the coordinates marked a location where less information was required to describe the volume of space than normal. It was a physics black hole, a place where reality was cheaper to render. At 7,000 meters, the lights were cut. The environment was now visible solely through the submersible's highly sensitive thermal and acoustic imaging. April froze the frame when the secondary sonar array, designed to detect microscopic pressure fluctuations, went instantly silent. Kalen immediately typed a command into his console. The log entry April read alongside the video confirmed her suspicion. Acoustic signature erased. Not damping. Erased. Target field confirming predicted suppression of inertial resonance. April realized they weren't just observing a natural phenomenon. They were entering a defined volume where physical laws were being actively renegotiated, and the researchers, driven by a perverse scientific curiosity, were pushing deeper toward the source of the erasure. Part 3. The anti-visual effect. The descent continued past 9,000 meters, and the environment outside the Acheron ceased to resemble water entirely. April Woods witnessed the beginning of the anti-visual effect. This wasn't the uniform darkness of the abyssal zone. This was the absence of visual data itself. The external floodlights, powerful enough to illuminate a football field at surface level, hit the water and simply stopped, not scattering or reflecting, but terminating abruptly about 10 feet from the hull. The researchers initially theorized a layer of hyperdense particulate matter, but Dr. Kalen, peering at the spectrograph readings, voiced the chilling truth, his voice barely a whisper in the recording. It's not absorbing the photons, Rorik. It's dissolving their existence. The location itself rejects stable interaction. April felt a visceral chill, despite the insulated temperature of the bunker. She focused on the reaction of the team's youngest member, Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma, the materials expert. Sharma was frantically testing the integrity of the titanium alloy hull, monitoring for stress fractures. Her readout, visible flickering in the corner of the screen, showed -0, stress. The paradoxical nature of the null zone was becoming terrifyingly clear. While the coordinates promised immediate spatial instability, the immediate environment surrounding the submersible was currently experiencing a weird hyperstabilization, as if the local laws of physics were bending over backward to protect the approaching craft. This suggested the anomaly was highly directional and geometric, focused solely on the target point. April used her forensic software to isolate the acoustic channel. Beneath the white noise and the system's hum, a low cyclical thrumming began to emerge, too regular to be natural, too deep to be mechanical. It sounded less like a vibration and more like a heartbeat struggling to maintain rhythm in a dying body. The internal camera shifted to Captain Rorik, who was staring fixedly at the external sonar display. The sonar image, usually a sharp topographical map, was dissolving into a field of randomized, high-energy static, punctuated by brief, incredibly sharp spikes. Rorik leaned into the comms system. Kalen, the coordinates are shifting. They're no longer fixed relative to the ocean floor. They're fixed relative to the Acheron dash. We are being drawn in. April paused the footage, noting the timestamp. 32 hours, 14 minutes, and 55 seconds. The coordinates, once displayed as 4 stable digits, were now cycling rapidly through millions of variations per second, centering only on the position of the submersible itself. This was the moment the research vessel transitioned from observer to participant, from seeker to bait. April recognized the cold, mathematical precision of the horror. They hadn't found the null zone. The null zone had found them and was now establishing an inescapable, inverse gravitational tether. Part 4. The inverse pull and the null coordinates. The Acheron was now moving under the influence of the anomaly, its own propulsion systems fighting a losing battle against the inverse gravitational pull. The footage at 28 hours 9 minutes and 12 seconds showed Dr. Kalin, eyes wide, struggling to input counterthrust commands, the display flashing force override, external vector. April Woods watched his desperate attempt to restore control. Kalin shouted, his voice strained by adrenaline. The target coordinates aren't static. They're collapsing the local metric around us. We're not falling into the zone. The zone is defining itself by our proximity. The meticulous, journalistic analysis April brought to the material was battling her instinctive human panic. She had to remind herself that this was history, not immediate danger. Yet the palpable fear in the video was contagious. The team was now focused entirely on the navigation screen, which displayed the fluctuating coordinates. These numbers, April knew, were the key to the entire incident. She zoomed in on the display using her advanced viewer software, isolating the repeating sequence that Kalin eventually stabilized, moments before total system collapse. -4.73200508. An impossibly precise, non-terminating irrational number, appearing in the latitude, longitude, and depth fields simultaneously. April immediately recognized it. The square root of 22.4, an arbitrary constant with no known cosmological significance. Yet here it was, defining the geometry of a spatial void. April mentally cataloged the finding. The null zone was mathematically defined, meaning it was either an exceptionally bizarre natural phenomenon or, far more terrifyingly, a highly sophisticated piece of targeted engineering. The noise outside the hull intensified. The low thrumming evolved into a sustained, rhythmic pressure pulse. The internal camera, fixed on the team's faces, captured the moment they collectively realized the hopelessness of their situation. Captain Rorik slammed his fist on the control panel, shouting for emergency ascent, but Kalin, obsessed with the mathematical beauty of the collapse, vetoed him. "Rorik, wait. This is it. The field is becoming perfectly localized. If we ascend, we lose the opportunity to record the stabilized singularity point. We must document the coordinate structure." The ensuing argument, brutal and brief, underscored the tension between survival and scientific imperative. April noted how Kalin's fixation on the coordinates bordered on religious fervor. He wasn't just observing the anomaly, he was drawn to its perfection. The coordinates were a siren song to a mind seeking ultimate physical truth. Rorik reluctantly yielded, initiating a controlled, albeit terrified, final descent, directly toward the mathematically defined, annihilating heart of the phenomenon. April felt the cold knot of realization tighten in her stomach. These researchers hadn't vanished accidentally. They had chosen their obliteration in the name of knowledge. Part 5. The Mid-Question and the Faith of the Doomed. The footage timestamp read 21 hours 55 minutes and 1 second. The Acheron was now plunging rapidly toward the singularity coordinates, propelled by the anomaly itself. April Woods paused the video again, leaning back in her seat, the oppressive silence of the bunker emphasizing the gravity of the decision captured on screen. Kalin and Rorik had passed the point of no return. This was the critical nexus of the Null Zone incident, the journalistic pivot point that April needed to dissect. She articulated the core problem, whispering the analysis to the secure recording system installed in her viewing station. Why did 14 brilliant minds choose to run toward the spatial void instead of initiating emergency ascent? What did the raw sensor data promise them that was worth obliteration? This wasn't just about professional dedication. It was about an intoxicating belief in the data over instinct, a fatalistic faith that April found deeply unsettling. She rewound the last 10 minutes of Kalin's input logs, searching for the hidden incentive. She found it, encrypted within a subroutine labeled entropy compensation. Kalin hadn't just been recording the coordinates of the singularity. He had discovered a localized temporal field reversal. For a fleeting instant, the coordinates represented a point where entropy, the universal march toward disorder, was momentarily halted, or even reversed. To a physicist, this was the holy grail, the key to perpetual energy or perhaps time manipulation. April realized that Kalin wasn't seeking his death. He was seeking perfect, timeless data. He believed that if he could record that 1 microsecond of perfect entropic stability, the risk of vanishing was justifiable. The mid-question was answered with the chilling clarity of high-level physics. They descended because they believed they could steal a moment of existence outside the flow of time itself. April resumed the footage. The pressure readings flashed red, deep into the catastrophic range, yet the hull held firm, protected by the same strange stabilizing field that enveloped the anomaly. Rorick's face was chalk white, his hands white-knuckled on the yoke. He was a survivor forced into martyrdom. The soundscape of the Acheron was deteriorating rapidly. The rhythmic thrumming now felt less external and more internal, vibrating through the bones of the crew. April observed the subtle physical signs. Dr. Kalin rubbed his temples, complaining of internal pressure displacement, and Commander Sharma's vision appeared to skip frames. The temporal field reversal was beginning to affect their perception, dragging their personal sense of time out of sync with objective reality. April realized that the team was already partially gone. Their consciousness was flickering, drawn by the irresistible gravity of the zero-entropy point. The pursuit of the perfect data point had transformed into a psychological collapse, forcing them toward the mathematical void that promised answers, but guaranteed extinction. Part 6. The subsonic rhythm and temporal decay. The Acheron entered the immediate proximity of the null coordinates. The depth gauge hit 10,994 meters, effectively the bottom of the trench, but the submersible was still descending, now into what Captain Rorick called negative depth, a phenomenon where the altimeter registered distance into a non-physical space. April Woods focused on the audio analysis provided by her forensic toolkit. The submersible's hydrophones were overwhelmed, but the internal microphones were picking up a subsonic frequency, a repetitive wave pattern that April's software identified as highly complex. Not random noise, but a structured sequence, possibly communicating something. April played the sound back, isolated. It was a dense, almost musical rhythm of pressure waves, suggesting a deliberate mechanism operating within the anomaly. It wasn't the sound of reality collapsing, it was the sound of reality being tuned. On the screen, the researchers were clearly struggling against the temporal distortion. April noted several instances of flicker in the video feed. Commander Sharma was seen pouring coffee, and then a fraction of a second later, pouring it again, the first action completely erased. Time was jittering, suggesting the Null Zone was testing the stability of local causal connections. April magnified the thermal scans of the hull. While the external temperature remained stable, the internal hull was radiating heat in brief, incredibly sharp spikes, moments when the structural integrity was theoretically annihilated, only to snap back into existence. The Null Zone was flexing its muscles, demonstrating its ability to erase physical mass and then restore it, selectively. Dr. Kalin, his face now etched with a desperate exhilaration, was frantically recording the numerical data produced by the zero-entropy coordinates. He shouted commands to his assistant to confirm the recording medium was triple redundant. "We cannot lose this sequence. It's the defining metric of non-existence." April felt her journalistic detachment fracturing. This was no longer a cold file. It was witnessing 14 people willingly entering a state of controlled, escalating madness, convinced that their data acquisition justified their disintegration. The sheer density of information being broadcast by the coordinates was overwhelming the Acheron systems. The primary communications array sputtered, failing to send even a simple beacon. April watched as Captain Rorick finally abandoned the physical controls, recognizing they were futile, and instead began prioritizing life support, initiating the final, desperate oxygen reclamation sequence. He was preparing for survival in an impossible environment, anticipating the moment the anomaly might stabilize, leaving them marooned in non-space. April knew this hope was cruelly misplaced. The coordinates were not stabilizing, they were concentrating. Part 7. The impossible data spike and the trace code. At 12 hours 5 minutes and 33 seconds, 5 minutes before the scheduled vanishing, the systems aboard the Acheron momentarily stabilized, driven by the sheer informational overload emanating from the null coordinates. This was the moment Dr. Kalin had chased, a perfect localized reversal of thermodynamic law. April Woods analyzed the visual display from the main sensor board, captured clearly on the video. The graph tracking the energy state of the ambient space went from maximum fluctuation to a single, flat line, registering zero-point energy, a perfect, crystalline stability at the point of greatest violence. Kaylin screamed in triumph, oblivious to the fact that the external environment was now dissolving into pure data. We have it. The proof. The system achieved perfect entropic reversal. His team was scrambling to save the files, burning the coordinates and the associated sensor data onto solid-state drives. April noticed something the official review panel had missed, something only visible with her specialized decryption tools. Within the massive burst of data being recorded, Kaylin's system received a unique, minute code stream, completely separate from the Null Zone's signature. It was a proprietary, non-standard digital handshake. April quickly isolated the string. It wasn't generated by the Acheron, and wasn't part of the natural anomaly's signature. It was an artifact. After running the string through her deep-level databases, April's internal alarm bells went deafeningly loud. The code belonged to Ares Dynamics, a defense contractor infamous for its black-budget material science projects, specializing in high-frequency radar negation and experimental quantum stealth technology. Ares Dynamics had no public connection to Project Kronos or the Navy. The realization slammed into April. The Null Zone was not a naturally occurring anomaly they found. It was a phenomenon, generated, or at the very least, amplified and controlled, by a clandestine defense entity, using the researchers as highly intelligent, disposable test subjects. The coordinates, the specific numerical sequence Kaylin had treasured, weren't the key to understanding nature. They were the precise tuning parameters for a weapon of spatial erasure. April rewound the footage of Kaylin's frantic data recording. He had captured the weapon's firing code, mistaking it for the voice of God. This proprietary trace code was the definitive evidence of foul play and deliberate annihilation. Outside the Acheron dash, the anti-visual effect was now total. The external cameras showed only a blinding, homogeneous white field, devoid of shadow or contrast, the ultimate visual cancellation. The atmosphere inside the submersible was thick with ozone and the metallic tang of fear. The researchers knew, in the final seconds, they had been duped. Part 8. The Vanishing Event, the Clinical Horror. The countdown timer on April Wood's screen flashed red, 30 seconds. The final, terrifying minutes of the Acheron were about to play out. The internal footage showed the researchers abandoning all scientific pretense and turning on Captain Rorik, demanding immediate assent. Their realization of betrayal hitting them in a desperate wave of collective panic. Rorik, however, was paralyzed, his hand hovering over the jettison control. Dr. Kaylin, now weeping, held the solid-state drive containing the perfect data against his chest, clutching his imminent death certificate. April tracked the visual dissolution. The lights inside the submersible began to flicker not uniformly, but segmentally, as if localized areas of the interior were losing their ability to hold light. Then came the sound. The rhythmic subsonic thrumming peaked into an ultrasonic whine, so high-pitched it was painful even through April's filtered speakers. The effect was immediate and devastating. The footage didn't show an explosion or crushing force. It showed a systemic, rapid, silent erasure. The metal components of the control panel didn't warp or break. They simply stopped reflecting light, becoming spatially inert, gray, then instantly gone. One of the researchers, standing near the viewport, dissolved from the feet up, not atom by atom, but by volume. A smooth, clean transition from 3 dimensions to 0. April watched, her breath hitched in her throat, as the horror unfolded with a clinical precision that transcended physical violence. Captain Rorik managed to shout a single, guttural word. "No!" Before the camera fixed on his face turned to dust, a light gray powder that instantaneously floated upward in the non-gravitational environment of the Acheron's collapsing internal structure. The audio feed registered a final, piercing screech, not human, but mechanical, the sound of stressed titanium being erased from existence. Then silence. Absolute, profound silence, the kind that swallows sound whole. The video feed didn't cut. It simply dissolved into pure static white, which then became pure black, devoid of signal, information, or even noise. April fast-forwarded the timestamp by 5 minutes. The external camera feed, which had sporadically returned, showed nothing but placid, dark water. The coordinates were now gone from the navigation display, the inverse pull having been momentarily released. The Null Zone incident wasn't a wreck, it was a vacuum. The Acheron Dash and the 14 souls aboard had not imploded. They had been seamlessly removed from the fabric of four-dimensional space, leaving behind nothing but the final, terrifying data spike April had discovered, the proprietary signature of Ares Dynamics. Part 9. The Spectral Footprint and the Journalistic Hunt. April Woods spent the next hour meticulously scrubbing the footage that followed the vanishing event. The Acheron was definitively gone. The subsequent search effort footage, included in the Vapor Trails file, showed remote operating vehicles, ROVs, sweeping the area days later. They found no physical trace, no metal fragments, no oil residue, only perfectly undisturbed sediment at the deepest point of the trench. However, April discovered one critical data point in the post-incident telemetry logs. A single brief transmission from the Acheron's emergency locating transponder YELT, which the Navy had dismissed as equipment malfunction due to pressure. April isolated the YELT log. For precisely 1.3 milliseconds, the transponder did not signal its position. It signaled an impossible velocity reading, Mach 20 instantaneously, followed by an equally instantaneous cessation of signal. The Acheron hadn't been destroyed in place. It had been accelerated to unimaginable speed and ejected from the location, either into a different physical space or perhaps an alternate dimension, consistent with high-level spatial manipulation technology. April focused her analysis entirely on the Ares Dynamics signature code. She understood the implication. The Null Zone was not a discovery, it was a technological testing ground. Ares Dynamics, contracted by the DATW, had engineered the spatial erasure field, tuning it to the exact mathematical constant, SQRT 22.4, to achieve maximum efficiency. They had lured the Project Kronos researchers, equipped with the most advanced recording equipment, to act as the final, highly sophisticated data retrieval mechanism, knowing full well the test would result in their annihilation and subsequent removal from the physical plane. April began constructing her final journalistic narrative, shifting from what happened to who is responsible. She realized the true target wasn't the deep-sea anomaly. It was the ability to control the coordinates of existence. The 14 scientists were merely collateral damage in the development of a weapon capable of literally removing targets from reality. April looked at the secure room's clock. Her authorized access window was closing fast. She had the coordinates, the proprietary code, and the undeniable evidence of organized annihilation. She copied the final, stabilized null coordinates, the zero-entropy signature, onto an encrypted, offline drive. This sequence of numbers, once the pride of Dr. Kalin, was now April Wood's greatest shield and her most potent weapon. The coordinates were not just a location in the ocean. They were the access key to a doorway engineered by Ares Dynamics, a doorway April knew she would eventually have to peer through if she wanted to find the missing researchers or expose the shadowy operation. She packaged the drive, her hands steady despite the profound fear that now gripped her. The fear of knowing too much about the fragility of the universe and the ruthlessness of men who sought to control it. Part 10. The Doorway and the Paranoid Outro. April Woods gathered her files, the holographic residue of the Vapor Trails footage still shimmering on the classified server screens. The security guard outside the bunker would be returning shortly, and the evidence of her access would be wiped clean by the internal system protocols. But April had what she came for: the definitive sequence. The null coordinates, the arbitrary constant, -4.73200508, etched into the memory of her encrypted drive. The official government file would close, marking the Null Zone incident as an unavoidable, tragic accident, filing the 14 brilliant researchers under missing, presumed annihilated by pressure. April knew the truth was exponentially darker. The research team wasn't testing the limits of the deep ocean. They were testing the structural integrity of reality itself, and reality, under the calculated strain of Ares Dynamics technology, had failed the test. The coordinates were the digital fingerprint of a hyperweapon capable of spatial relocation or complete ontological erasure. April thought about Dr. Kalin, mesmerized by the mathematical beauty of his demise, and Captain Rorik, who died trying to save lives in a realm where life was no longer permitted. They had stumbled onto a scientific catastrophe that was actually a planned, weaponized success. April finalized the security encryption on her drive, the paranoia inherent in her field now spiking into justified terror. Ares Dynamics, she knew, didn't care about the dead, but they cared profoundly about the security of their successful test parameters. She now possessed the location of their doorway, the precise numerical key to their spatial manipulation field. Her final action inside the bunker was to delete the redundant backup of her log, ensuring the access trail ended abruptly. As she stood to leave, April glanced back at the blank screen where the coordinates had glowed just moments before. She felt a cold certainty. The coordinates didn't just mark the spot where 14 people vanished. They marked the point where the world, as we understood it, briefly ceased to exist. And now, the corporate entity who created the coordinates knows April Woods has the location of their doorway. Her investigation had crossed the line from journalistic inquiry to high-stakes survival. The only question left was not where the Acheron went, but when Ares Dynamics would try to retrieve their stolen key from the only person who knew the truth.